The greatest voices sometimes belong to the quietest spaces, the forgotten, the underheard, the over-listened to, and a small-town middle school within a gymnasium of folding chairs, humming lights, and fidgeting students was the last place anyone suspected. Something remarkable took place, but not in the manner anyone could have imagined. It didn't start with a spotlight or applause, but with a whisper, a joke. A blind boy, just 13, who had always been different, always silent, was suddenly required to sing in front of the whole school, not because anybody believed in him, but because somebody thought that it would be amusing, and yet, with steady hands and a steady breath, he agreed. What ensued was not a performance, it was a transformation that took place quietly, because sometimes life will present a moment when cruelty and grace collide, and grace doesn't just survive, it sings. That boy Elijah had something a lot deeper than anyone in his life could perceive. Ears by a grandmother whose voice filled their small house with gospel and soul music, Elijah did not learn music from lessons or books. He learned it in silence, in stillness, in the pain of being ignored. He sang not to impress, but to survive. And in that gym, with a single microphone and a voice born from places most of us will never know, he shifted the entire room. He reminded people, teachers, parents, classmates, that beneath every quiet face might live a story we've never taken the time to hear. His voice didn't rise to shock or entertain. It came like a memory, like truth, like the voice of someone finally heard. When the room grew silent and hearts broke open, those who had once laughed found themselves hearing in ways they never had. No one departed as they were. And as applause sounded and videos were shared and doors opened that never had before, Elijah was still the same boy with the same old hoodie, the same white cane, and the same quiet strength. He did not go after revenge, nor did he pursue fame. He just kept singing softly, truthfully, as always. Because at times, the strongest thing you can do isn't to yell, it's to rise up, sing your truth, and let silence be deafening. And perhaps the true tale isn't about a song. Perhaps it's about how a single voice, soft, untrained, surprising, can become a mirror for all of us. A reminder of how so easily we pass over what truly matters. A wake-up call to listen more carefully, to lead with compassion, to cease judging that we know someone's history just by how they look. So bear with me taking you there to the point where the joke became an epiphany, where a blind boy sang his truth and dumbfounded the world. It began as a heartless joke. Some of the boys sitting in the back of the 8th grade room, kids with something witty to say at all times, were chuckling as they whispered their new scheme during free time. Let's get Elijah to sing at the school assembly. One of them gurgled, his voice low and self-satisfied. Another laughed into his sleeve, attempting to keep it hidden. Yeah, make him the headline act. It'll be funny. The group laughed to themselves, already envisioning the humiliation. Elijah, 13, had been blind since birth. He wasn't a boy the other kids spoke to much. He was polite, quiet, and generally ate alone during lunch. He always carried his white cane with the red tip, tapping gently in front of him down the halls. Most of the children didn't know Elijah that well, and to be honest, they didn't care to. They referred to him as kids sometimes do. Fast, thoughtless, and mean. They called him names behind his back, Radio Stevie, and worse names that made teachers act like they didn't hear. But what they did not know, what nearly nobody in that school knew, was that Elijah held something within him much bigger than they could possibly conceive. A gift, a voice, a sound that resided in the deep of his chest, honed by late nights and forgotten songs, forged in heartache and silence. Even Elijah himself did not know what that voice would be. Not truly. He had only sung to himself, occasionally softly in his room or with his grandma when she played her old records on the weekends. So when the student council rep stood before the class and invited anyone to do a solo act at the school assembly coming up, an open mic featuring poetry, music, and skits, the boys saw their chance. They held up their hands and said, Elijah should do it. He sings, right? The room fell silent, a few kids glancing in his direction, half curious, half confused. Elijah hesitated. His hand trailed along the rim of his desk. Perhaps he recognized what was going on. Perhaps he didn't, but then, gradually, he stood up. His cane tapped softly in front of him as he got to his feet. He didn't ask what they meant. He didn't hesitate. In a soft, calm voice, he simply said, yeah, I'll sing. For a second, the class was frozen in silence, surprised by his answer. Then the snickering returned, soft and nervous. The boys in the back chuckled under their breath like they couldn't believe it actually worked. But Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't scowl or question or back down. He stood there in the front of the room with a silent sort of quiet that some people might confuse for weakness. But it wasn't. It was strength waiting just under the surface. The kind of strength that doesn't have to make a point of itself. The kind that bides its time. The teacher nodded, perhaps a bit surprised herself, and jotted down his name, Elijah Williams. One vocal performance, she said, and just like that, the lineup was set. But nobody, not the boys who mocked him, not the teacher, not even Elijah himself, could have guessed what was really coming. Because when you're overlooked for so long, the world starts to forget what you were capable of. But Elijah never did, and in a few short days, the joke would be on them. Because the voice they'd intended to mock was going to depart the entire school speechless. The school assembly day had finally arrived, and the gymnasium hummed with the familiar bam of chattering and nerves. Folding chairs stood in uneven rows across the floor, and parents started streaming in, moms gripping purses, dads adjusting phones, teachers double-checking clipboards and schedules. Kids in tight shoes stood near the stage, rehearsing their lines, warming up their instruments, or just looking for their parents in the crowd. This was the kind of day everyone remembered, mostly for the laughter and the harmless mistakes, the poems read too fast, the magic tricks that didn't quite work, the recorder solos that made dogs bark 2 blocks away. That's what they expected. And when the principal touched the microphone and said, "Next up," Elijah Williams with a vocal performance. Some parents tilted toward one another, confused. Some of the students glanced up from their programs, attempting to recall who that was. The gym fell silent a little from the stages. Opposite side, Elijah moved cautiously forward, his shoulder supported by a staff member's hand. His white cane tapped in a light rhythm as he walked, and his face was placid, serious, never afraid. In the back row, the same group of boys who'd made him a joke couldn't suppress their smirks. One boy leaned forward and whispered, "Here we go," with that caustic tone that only 8th grade boys master. Some of them elbowed one another, hoping this was the moment something would go terribly wrong at last. The cringe. Worthy singing, the queasy silence, the laughter they'd been rehearsing in secret all week. But Elijah stood before the microphone with a quality of quiet, as if the world could just wait for him to get on with it. He breathed. His fingers quivered softly at his sides, trembling against his pant leg. His heart pounded more loudly than the muffled hum of conversation in the crowd. And then he sang. No lead in, no warning, just one crisp, pure note that wafted out of him like a wisp of smoke. And immediately the room shifted. It wasn't boisterous. It wasn't flashy. There were no tracks behind him to fall back on, no instruments, no flashing lights, only Elijah and a microphone. But what he produced was different. His voice was smooth, softly warm, and wrapped around each ear in the room with a quiet sureness. It was honey poured slow and steady, sweet, with a weight behind. Deep like river water, it was strong but cracked ever so slightly on the edges, as if it was a voice that had weathered something, as if it contained more than words. It contained memory and feeling and something unsaid that only music is able to say. Sang a tune his grandmother used to sing to him before bed, one she told him gave her courage when the world wouldn't. A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. It wasn't a song. Nobody ever thought of it as a song. It was a message, a promise, a quiet storm swathed in melody. At the second verse, the whole room was silent. Not only quiet, but still. A kind of stillness that is holy, as though everyone had collectively remembered how to listen. A teacher in the front row slowly removed her glasses, blinking furiously. A mother in the back silently wiped a tear from her cheek with her sweater sleeve. One boy on the basketball team sat frozen, his phone half raised but never pressed record. Even the principal leaned forward, hands together, eyes wide. And those boys, the ones who had thought it would be funny, they didn't budge. No jokes, no laughs, just wide-eyed, stunned silence. Elijah continued to sing as if he was alone in the room, as if he was in his tiny bedroom in his house, humming as rain hit the windows, as if nobody ever teased him, and the world at last, for this single moment, grew silent enough to hear him out. His voice did not swell for effect. It didn't have to. It didn't ask for. Attention, it took it, note by note. He stripped away each layer of that joke and exposed something so raw, so gorgeous, that it left people gasping. When he hit the final lines, it's been a long time coming. But I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes, it will. He sustained the last note just long enough to let it sink in, and he backed away from the mic, shaking hands still slightly, lips clamped shut, face serene. There was a pause, just 1 second, where everybody held still, as if they were waiting to see if the magic had actually broken. And then the silence shattered, not with laughter, not with cringing applause, but with applause, true loud cresting applause, the kind that builds like a wave. The type of people don't decide to give, it just happens. Some folks stood up, some wiped their tears, some just gazed, not knowing what they had just seen, but all of them felt it, because what had begun as a joke turned into something none of them would ever forget. Elijah had shared with them something that didn't have to be defined, only felt. Undefined, and for the first time, the entire school was finally really listening. When he was done, Elijah did not grin, he did not bow, he did not raise his hands or attempt to bask in the moment. He just stood there, unmoving and silent, exhaling quietly into the microphone as though he'd uttered a truth too dense to follow with clapping. The final note of the song still lingered in the air, tenuous and hanging like a feather drifting down after a storm, and for Entent just one instant. Nobody stirred, not a whisper, not a shuffle, not even the squeak of a folding chair. Then quietly, someone came on the stage, put a guiding hand on Elijah's shoulder, and escorted him down the steps. And the moment his feet landed on the gym floor, it occurred. The clapping ceased. Not the kind you'd associate with a class play or science fair. Not the kind that's automatic, as if that's something that is expected of people. No, this was clapping that crept up from the heart, like thunder rumbling in the distance and becoming louder with each clap. First, the teachers, those who had seen Elijah move through the halls in silence for years, never having a clue what lay beneath the timid face. Then the parents' mothers who moistened the corners of their eyes, fathers who rocked back in their chairs, allowing the noise to do their speaking for them. And lastly, the students, the very same people who'd scarcely known his name a week ago, now applauded like they'd just seen something holy. The cheering built up like a wave, full and strong, loosening something in the room that had been jammed up a long time. Yet, even while all this was going on, Elijah did not give any sign of it. He did not puff out his chest or smile extravagantly. He returned to his seat, cane held head level, not proud, not embarrassed, just steady, as if he knew this wasn't a performance for applause. As if this moment wasn't about being seen, but about being heard. He sat down without a word, holding his cane neatly beside him. The world around him was changed. One teacher leaned over to another and whispered, "I didn't even know he could sing." Her voice broke with the sort of awe that makes you feel like a heel for never having asked before. A student next to Elijah turned around and said softly but sincerely, "Man, that was amazing." Not half jokingly, not with shock, just reality. Nobody asked him how he learned to sing that way. Nobody made fun of him. The giggles, the whispers, the sideways looks that had once trailed behind him down the corridors, all were gone, replaced by something quieter, deeper respect. The boys who had begun it all, the ones who imagined it would be so funny to push Elijah into the limelight and see him stumble, it was silence where they sat. No snickering, no self-satisfied looks. Their expressions were a different one now, one of regret, perhaps shame, but certainly awe. They refused to look at anyone in the eye, particularly not Elijah, because all of a sudden this was no longer a joke. The prank they had played wasn't a prank, it was a reveal of something they never could have anticipated, something beautiful, something true. Elijah hadn't sung just a song. He'd held a mirror up to the whole school, and what it reflected was how quickly people had underestimated him, how readily they'd laughed at someone they'd barely met, and how potent it was when the person they'd ignored refused to remain hidden. Even the gymnasium itself was altered. The banners that hung on the walls didn't count. The clamorous lights overhead hummed slightly softer. The stage, once a venue for jokes and light humor, now vibrated like a holy place. Everyone in the room had sensed it, whether they realized it or not. A change, a silent recognition. A slight but significant crack in the walls they'd all constructed around what they believed they knew about people like Elijah. And him. He simply sat, breathing quietly, his fingers lightly on the folded cane at his side. No fanfare, no prideful looks, simply quiet. As though to say, this is the way I've always been. You simply never asked at that moment. Elijah didn't require being informed he was incredible. He didn't require an award or a trophy or a name on the school intercom shout out. Because the room had shifted and he could sense it. The same individuals who previously regarded him as a joke now regarded him as something different altogether. A voice, a soul, a tale worth hearing. And though the assembly went on and other kids nervously went up to recite their poems and card tricks and humorous skits, everyone knew that nothing that followed would ever be as memorable as the just past moment, because nobody was expecting Elijah to excel. That's what made it so memorable. Later that same week, long after the gymnasium had cleared and the folding chairs were put away, something surprising occurred. A music instructor by the name of Mrs. Whitmore, who taught at the school for close to 20 years and figured she'd heard it all, encountered Elijah in the hallway just outside the lunchroom. She laid a gentle hand on his arm and asked, "Elijah, where did you learn to sing like that?" Hers was a soft voice, but there was a sort of reverence to it, like when people talk after they've just seen something sacred. Elijah didn't turn around. He didn't grin wide or look shocked. He just shrugged, tightened the strap of his backpack, and said softly, "My grandma, I just sing what I feel." That was all. No elaborate explanation. No sprawling anecdote. Just the plain truth. But behind that truth was a world most humans never saw. Elijah had been living with his grandmother, Miss Loretta, since he was 6 years old. His mother had died suddenly, an accident no one really ever spoke of anymore, and his father was never in the picture. Miss Loretta had welcomed him unhesitantly, raising him in a small two-bedroom house with a squeaky screen door, frayed curtains, and the type of kitchen that always carried the scent of cornbread and something simmering on the stove. She was the type of woman who went to the corner store in house slippers, referred to everyone as baby, and never kept her Bible further than an arm's length away. But above all, she sang. Miss Loretta once belonged to a gospel choir in Macon, Georgia, way back in the 70s, when church basements were concert halls every Sunday morning. She didn't have a record, no photographs from those days, only tales and a voice that still resonated all around the house whenever she did laundry or stirred green. The house was always filled with music, even in silence. Mahalia Jackson's voice would float from the old record player in the living room. Al Green, Nat King Cole, and sometimes Otis Redding Wynn. Miss Loretta was in a particular sort of mood. Elijah had learned growing up from that music, not visually, but audrally. He'd learned to listen to every note, every breath, every little moment of soul that went into those old songs. He didn't need classes. He didn't need music sheets. He just listened, not with his ears, but with something more. And in the quiet of his room, in the vibration of his grandmother's humming, in the groans of the old floorboards, and the crackle of vinyl records, Elijah found his voice. He never sang to be noticed. He sang because it was as natural as breathing. And when the outside world paid no attention to him or mocked him, music was where he dissolved and somehow became seen completely. He sang when he was afraid, when he was alone, when the pain of being different weighed too much to bear. And that voice that poured out of him on stage, that wasn't something learned, that wasn't honed in front of a mirror or developed through years of singing lessons. It was bred from silence, from long, still afternoons where no one called, from birthdays with only 2 cards on the table and a slice of store-bought cake. From listening, actually listening, to the voices of individuals who'd experienced pain, endured it, and transformed it into something beautiful. That's what Elijah had done. Not only that one time on stage, but every day since he was big enough to hum to his grandmother's old records. He'd been crafting that voice in darkness, in hiding, in the crevices of lost places, and when it finally arrived, it was truthful, unadulterated. The type of singing that made individuals forget the world for an instant, the type that made them remember something they'd lost but couldn't name. Mrs. Whitmore lingered there for a second, grasping Elijah's words as something greater than just a mere answer, and perhaps they were. Perhaps when he stated, "I just sing what I feel," what he was really saying was, "I've been singing my entire life. You simply finally heard me." As Elijah departed, tapping lightly down the corridor with his cane, she didn't stop him, didn't request more. Because in that one exchange, she'd heard more than sufficient. Sometimes the most extraordinary gifts are not born under the glare of spotlights, but rather behind closed doors, in the quiet, in the mundane, in rooms where eyes do not watch, except perhaps a grandmother softly humming in the room next door. And perhaps that is what made Elijah's talent so extraordinary. Not merely the manner in which he sang, but the manner in which he lived, the manner in which he waited, the manner in which he waited, the way he let his voice rise when the time was finally right. Word spread, as it tends to when something true and unfiltered finds its way out into the world. It began with a low-quality video, shot on a teacher's phone from the side of the gym, that recorded Elijah standing at the mic, blind, serene, moves and singing with a voice that sounded like it cracked open the air itself. The video was brief, a concentration shaky, the lighting unbalanced, but that didn't matter. What people heard was stronger than any production could have been. The teacher posted it on Facebook with a single caption. He left us speechless. So then an hour, it was being shared from one timeline to another. Then it ended up on TikTok where a teenager added subtitles and over the top piano music beneath. On Twitter, it was reposted with the caption, "A blind boy was rigged to be mocked," and then this happened. That single post got retweeted more than 30,000 times. And then YouTube, where reaction videos came flooding in, adults sobbing in their vehicles, grandparents commenting that he reminded them of Sam Cooke, teenagers typing out comments like, "This made me rethink everything." Elijah's name was being mentioned well outside the confines of that school within a matter of days. A news team contacted him for an interview, and a gentle speaking reporter appeared at Elijah's front door with a cameraman and a notebook. She sat on Miss Loretta's flowered couch, sipping sweet tea and listening in stunned silence as Elijah quietly told her that music was in him all along. He just never believed the world would care to listen. A small non-profit organization that awarded scholarships to young musicians wrote an email stating they'd like to pay for his voice lessons if he were interested. Nashville music producer with a resume that read like a Grammy roster left a voicemail that concluded with, "We'd love to talk, no pressure." But Elijah didn't make any rash decisions. There were no drastic changes in life, no flashy suits, no press junkets, no last-minute fame fantasies, meant to seize. He still strolled down the same school corridors with his cane at the ready, tapping steadily by lockers and classrooms, sporting his favorite faded hoodie, the one with a small hole in the sleeve and frayed strings. But something was different, not him, them. The very same students who previously laughed or simply looked past him now glanced toward him, not with pity, but with respect. They nodded when he walked by. Some of them even smiled. Some of them paused to comment, "Hey man, that was great," or simply a soft hi, which meant the same. He wasn't invisible now. He didn't have to yell to be heard now. The room heard him, even when he wasn't singing, and those boys, the ones who decided that it would be humorous to toss him on stage as a joke, never apologized. Not exactly. They never approached him and confessed to what they did, never took ownership of the cruelty in their laughter. But something changed. One of them, Tyler, the ringleader, the one with the too loud voice and the smirk that often preceded trouble, signed up for choir the following semester. No one anticipated it. He appeared late to the first practice, shoulders slumped, eyes cast downward. But he sat beside Elijah, right next to him, not in the back of the room, not over there, right next to him. And when the teacher directed them to run scales, Tyler did not joke or mess around. He copied Elijah's example. They didn't say much. They didn't need to, because sometimes change doesn't require speech. Sometimes it's just quiet, like music beneath the surface, like healing that begins with showing up. Elijah never boasted. He never reminded anyone what they'd done. He just kept singing softly, honestly, like always. And in that room among kids who once viewed him as nothing, he was something else now. A voice that couldn't be ignored. A presence that altered the space around him. Because sometimes a voice doesn't just fill a room, it alters it. It makes people stop, think, listen differently. And in the process, it changed them. Elijah wasn't pursuing fame, but he walked directly into purpose. And the world, blind to him no more, opened its eyes at last. Sometimes life quietly reminds us that the ones we neglect possess the most profound strength. Elijah did not scream to be heard. He did not struggle for attention. He just appeared with humility, with emotion, and with a voice defined not by education but by integrity. In a world that tends to praise the most vocal, it's simple to overlook the quiet ones, the ones who wait, listen, and bear their anguish like a melody in waiting. And perhaps that is the actual lesson here. That kindness is important, that second chances may arrive wrapped in the most unusual moments, that we never truly know what someone is burdened with until they finally open the door and let the light in. So the next time a person stands silently in the corner of a room or struts the hall a little differently, stop, listen, because you might just see something you'll never forget.